What I wanted to do, I'm the president and CEO of Avail Bennefits. We were brought in to assist Leon schools to try to come up with a way to comply with the audit recommendations. What I wanted to do is I put together a really short 3-slide presentation to kind of give you some background on what we're up against, how we are resolving the issues, and answer any questions you may have about why we're doing, why we're doing it the way we're doing it, those types of things. And then hopefully get a little bit of input from you guys about how we move forward with this. In the public sector, there are specific requirements for public procurement for anything above a certain threshold. Public procurement is required to be sealed bids. The district itself is responsible for this process. There are ways to use the expertise of a broker or agent, but it doesn't alleviate the district's responsibility to comply with statute and rules and regulations. So typically what you'll see in the market is public entities, schools, counties, cities, water districts, things like that, will issue the public procurement document. It's done through their website. It's received sealed bids. Copies are kept by the municipality. A copy is then given to the broker/agent who, under the supervision of the municipality, assists in the analysis. All of it is done through a cone of silence. That is statutorily required. Any communication, questions, answers, those types of things there's a firm deadline. That firm deadline must be adhered to. The answers are published for all the participants to see. And then there's a point in time where, with an RFP, those results are then voted on, approved, and then there's a 72-hour blackout period allowing for bid protest. That's the traditional methodology. The use of a broker does not alleviate a municipality from having to comply with that. The broker simply can function as an assistant in this. So having said all of that, through this process, we found that there were pieces of information that are typically utilized in a typical normal procurement process, such as loss histories, high cost claims, things like that, that your particular carrier, being an HMO, is not required by statute to release. HMOs are regulated under different statutes than insurance companies or PPOs. A lot of that has to do with their rate making, and I don't want to mislead anybody. It's not in any kind of a sinister fashion. They just have different rules to follow. So because of that, if we're going to run an official procurement that is fair and transparent, it was the opinion of the group of us that an invitation to negotiate for medical care would be the best solution. What an invitation to negotiate allows is more dialogue and conversation, because they're not going to have as much or as many pieces of actual hard data to function within. I had conversation with potential vendors that wanted to respond. They expressed to me some of their concerns about the data. There was no concern necessarily about the group, just they need data to be able to price the risk appropriately. There's also Florida statute that requires solvency. If you misprice a group on a premium as high as you have, you could get into solvency requirement issues at the state with Office of Insurance Regulation pretty quickly. So an ITN would allow us to explore all of those options. It will also allow us to structure a contract. We use the state of Florida's contract, as well as Hillsborough County Schools and a variety of other school districts who use ITNs as a template for constructing what we've done. The ITN itself is in final draft stages right now. It was reviewed by one of the top procurement litigators in the state, We asked them to find any problems that might exist and corrected those problems. So we're pretty comfortable that what we have is in the best interest of Leon schools to comply with the Audit General recommendation. So the stage we're at right now is going through the invitation to negotiate for the medical carrier. When that is complete, we will move into the request for proposal for broker. That's something that is typically done every so many years. The broker's contract is running out, so that's not out of the ordinary that we would do that and run an RFP for broker. We want to run the RFP in a way to allow Leon Schools to strengthen its monitoring and documentation of the contract.
I just wanted to make sure that everyone on the committee knew that the reason that we wanted to be able to do the invitation to negotiate is because we can. Before, with the with the RFP, we've just had to take whatever the proposal is, whatever is in the proposal, the good, the bad, you take the proposal in whole. There's no negotiating specifics. But with an ITN, we can actually negotiate, to your point, all the different details. We can get into, getting some of that data, making sure that they're communicating with us on things. Like, we can actually get into each of those pieces, whereas with an RFP, we basically take what we get.
Yeah, so Kim, that is correct. Your procurement, the reason we went through your procurement manuals, because we had to comply with your procurement manual as well as state statutes, rules and regulations of Department of Education. Your procurement manual allows for an invitation to negotiate. Not all school districts have that flexibility. You have that flexibility. What the ITN allows us to do is have more open dialogue with people who are interested in competing for your business. It'll help us understand more about where they're coming from, why they ask the kind of questions they ask, and we'll be able to try to gather the relevant information and get it back out. The other thing it allows us to do is, during the best and final negotiation stage of the invitation, we can negotiate with multiple vendors at one time, independently of each other, and get the best outcome in a fair and transparent way for Leon Schools. So, given the fact that a request for proposal is a very rigid process, when you're thinking about that in terms of a broker, that process works fine. It's a less tedious process. It's a lot more structured. And Leon Schools is familiar with the request for proposal. You've run them on brokers in the past. The invitation to negotiate is a little bit more dynamic and allows more flexibility from Leon's perspective to get the root of your questions answered. It is still it's still a closed process. There's still the cone of silence. You cannot have any kind of bid manipulation or anything like that. The structure is secure. It just allows more dialogue. What this process will allow us to do is ask the question directly. In a request for proposal, you can't negotiate on any terms outside the four corners of the proposal. In an invitation, you can't really get outside of that, but you pose a series of questions in the initial stage. The ITN that we're developing includes questions about, will you release the claims histories? Will you release large claims? How are your rates calculated? Those types of things. And because that's in the ITN, that means that when we sit down in the discussion phase with other carriers that are going to come in and compete for your business, we can ask those questions and document what their responses are, that we have gone through the competitive process to the best of our ability. As far as getting the fair shake, we will be in a negotiation phase. We've looked into in great detail the contract that Capital Health Plan granted to the state when they were awarded the business up here in the Central Panhandle. The state ran an ITN, Capital Health Plan won the business. The contract that was negotiated for, that Capital agreed to and the state agreed to, has a lot more requirements of transparency. We're going to use that same model. And that is not going to, by the way, that is not going to come to as a surprise to Capital Health Plan. I've also sat down and had conversation with Capital Health Plan about our concerns. So none of this is going to catch anybody off guard. They understand why we're doing it. They understand that we are required by state statute and rules and regulations to do it. They're very comfortable with that. So, we'll be able to get to the bottom of all your questions. The requirements in the ACA caps, ACA's federal regulation, it caps profitability of carriers. So a lot of people are thinking back in the days prior to 2010 that a carrier could charge whatever they want as long as someone was willing to pay it. When ACA came out, prior to 2010, the state of Florida operated at what a 65% MLR. MLR stands for medical loss ratio. That's how many cents of every dollar is to be spent on healthcare claims. So in the state of Florida, they were trying to foster competition way back in the day, and they set that number at 65%. If you imagine that's a floor. And then brokers and clients would negotiate to squeeze that other 35%. What happened with ACA in 2010, one of the better aspects of ACA was it capped the maximum profitability of a carrier. Carriers can only make a maximum of 7.5% on any client or on any plan or program design. They can only make 7.5%. They can keep all of the profit up to 5%, and they can only keep half of the profit from 5.1% to 10%, bringing it to 2.5%. So that's 5 plus 2.5. And then everything above 10% has to be returned back into the plan. So that's a clause that's monitored and managed by HHS in Washington. A lot of people aren't aware of. So some of the negotiation has to do with you need to be able to look into the data to be able to negotiate and push on different parts of the program. So this ITN and this RFP are going to do that. We spent quite a bit of time combing through all the last, I think we went 7 years back. I can't really remember. I think we went 7 years back in CHP financial statements. When you go through that, they have to file company financial statements at the federal level. And we knew how to pull those financials, and we pulled those financials and went through them to find out, exactly what their profit margin is. Are they making money hand over fist, or are they truly operating as a nonprofit? I was pleasantly surprised to find they were not making money hand over fist. They run a pretty lean operation. From my perspective, that's really the only source of information I could find about the efficiency until we go through this process and pull out and tease out specific questions with them. But if you ever did want to know what that looks like, what a financial statement for Capital Health Plan looks like, we have all that data as well that we've gone through.
I just think that doing the procurement again this way through the ITN and flowing it through the district, we're just going to have a lot more access to, to the whole procurement that we didn't really see previously when, the broker was handling the RFP and the responses and all of that. So I truly hope that we will have access to a lot more information and that a lot more of our questions are going to be answered this time around with this procurement.
A portion of the ITN moves through a ranking sheet. There has to be a ranking sheet, a methodology that's used to evaluate stage by stage through the process. And we have developed and are going through the final stages of refining what that looks like. So one thing that would be helpful to me is if we could go person by person that chooses to put some information in here, your input on these categories, on these items. These are all specific portions of the presentation from the respondents that we're going to be evaluating and asking questions about. We are trying to develop the process by which to rank them and rate their responses. What would be helpful is if I could get each person to, of those 9 categories, just write down what you believe are the 5 most important categories. So the carrier will assign an account management team or someone that will work directly from the insurance carrier to the district. That relationship typically goes through HR, CFO office, your benefits type people. Normally on a group your size, you'll have 2 or 3 different people assigned from the carrier that wins the business to your group. That is what that question is specifically about. Who are they assigning? What's their experience? And what are they going to be doing to support the group? So I just described account management. Carrier experience is how long has the carrier been in business and what experience do they have with school districts or groups, specifically the size of Leon County schools. Part of this discussion with the carrier is going to be targeting around what do you do in the Central Panhandle specifically, because that is a little bit of a unique situation compared to, say, a Pasco schools or an Orange County schools. You're a pretty sizable group to be in an area from some perspectives as remote as this. So what experience do they have with that? The claims management and processing. When you have a claim and you're having a problem getting it paid, you're having a problem with communications between the carrier and the provider. What are they going to do to take care of that? How are they going to support you and help you in that regard? Help the district, whatever the case may be when it comes to claims. The cost of the plan is the premium. It's the gross premium. This has nothing to do with the contribution from the district to the employee. The formula that we use is pretty simple. It's contribution from the district plus deduction from the employee equals the premium. What we are concerned with at this point is the premium. So the cost of the plan will be the premium for each plan. The data and monitoring is a significant shortfall where you are now. We don't really care about how fancy reports are. We want to see the root data. We want to see what's happening in the group, and we want to know how often, the reporting piece is how often and how detailed that is going to be. Whether that is scrubbed and put into a beautiful presentation or not, those things are always nice, but you can, anytime you take data and turn that into information, and then you turn that information into a presentation, there's typically always a sales angle or bias. So we need to be able to get back to the root data. Member engagement is what is the group doing to engage the member into the health plan? Finding doctors, finding the best doctors, physical therapy. What do they have in terms of being able to find the lowest cost provider for a given procedure? All of those things fall under member engagement. Plan design is the structure of the plan, deductibles, copays, those types of things. Provider network has to do with the doctors and hospitals that you have access to. You currently are in an HMO, which means you have what's considered or called a closed network. Typically, HMOs do a pretty good job managing certain aspects of the provider or the care delivery system, but it's probably not a very well-known thing that there are actually 3 HMOs that exist in Leon County. CHP is one, Aetna has one, and United Healthcare has one. So there are 3 HMOs. So if you like the structure of an HMO, and this is as recently as 4 or 5 years ago that these became HMOs here. So when CHP first came to be back in the 80s, they were trying to resolve a specific care delivery problem, and they chose an HMO mechanism to do it. So we're going to get into the provider network and determine what kind of disruption is going to happen. Is it a good or bad disruption? Because sometimes disruption is a positive thing. If you're able to cull out doctors that maybe don't have good outcomes or charge more than they should, those types of things. So that's the provider network. And then the wellness program, everybody's familiar with wellness programs. It is kind of a catch-all phrase. I've seen people that have wellness programs and for dog food for people's dogs. It can mean a lot of things. What I'm specifically asking about here is a population health wellness program. Given your employees in your location with your specific health conditions, what are they going to do? If the group has a higher occurrence of diabetes, for example, what's their approach in a wellness program to help the employees overcome that? If it's an obesity problem or a tobacco problem, what are they going to do? What kind of programs do they have specifically for the employees? That's what each one of those categories mean.